In 1989,
What is that?
one man uttered words the U.S. government had
Oh
been
my God,
trying
look
to
at the
bury
lights.
for decades.
It's moving!
Bob Lazar claimed to have touched technology that defied the laws of physics. 9 flying saucers, hidden in the mountains of Nevada. Powered by an element that doesn't exist on Earth, George Knapp was the only journalist willing to air it. And that very night, the hunt began.
Wait, look
Lazar's
over there.
documents disappeared. His past was erased from
what do I do
databases.
with that?
Witnesses went silent.
Keep filming, keep
But
filming.
the question remained,
As you can see on the
if
schematic,
he
the
was a
propulsion
liar,
system utilizes
why did they try so
anti-gravity
desperately to
principles.
silence him? Today, we'll reveal Area 51's
What is
most
that
closely guarded
Are
secret.
you recording this?
3
It's
hours
so
of evidence
bright.
they didn't want you to see. The journey of Lazar into the realm of the extraordinary begins not in the desert, but rather within a man consumed by a fascination with speed, energy, and the unexplored. Long before his name was inextricably linked to Area 51 and UFOs, Lazar had already established himself as an eccentric figure, a person who lived on the periphery of conventional science. Born Robert Scott Lazar on January 26, 1959, he developed a penchant for tinkering that marked his formative years. From an early age, he gravitated not towards polished academic tomes, but towards the exhilarating spark inherent in experimentation. Neighbors often recalled his engrossing interest in machinery and explosive devices, and as he matured, that inquisitiveness evolved into ventures that fused audacity with creativity. For Lazar, the demarcation between a hobby and an obsession was strikingly thin. He gained notoriety for taking commonplace apparatus and stretching their limits, often yielding unpredictable outcomes. By the 1980s, Lazar's exploits propelled him into a realm of visibility. In Los Alamos, New Mexico, a small community built around one of the world's foremost scientific facilities, his presence stood out, not for being a member of the Institute's workforce, but due to his flair for the theatrical. He made headlines by modifying a Honda Civic into a jet car, a remarkable feat that captivated local media. Images of Lazar and his jet-powered vehicle appeared in newspapers, portraying him as a quirky but compelling figure, a blend of scientist and showman. That jet car evolved into more than just a curiosity. It epitomized who Lazar was, a man restless with constraints and willing to risk both ridicule and peril in pursuit of discovery. Some depicted him as a visionary without boundaries, while others categorized him as a reckless maverick. Both portrayals would shadow him in the years to come. Lazar also asserted that he possessed formal academic credentials to complement his unorthodox tinkering. He spoke of his studies in physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and advanced courses at the California Institute of Technology. He named professors and recounted experiences from prestigious laboratories. However, when inquisitive researchers and journalists sought evidence, they unearthed none. No enrollment records, no academic papers, no transcripts. To skeptics, this absence provided confirmation of a fabricated past. Conversely, true believers perceived it as another instance of suppression, convinced that forces were engaged in erasing his history as part of a broader campaign to silence him. The reality, as with many aspects of Lazar's narrative, dwelled in ambiguity. What could be substantiated was his presence in Los Alamos during the early 1980s. A directory from the Los Alamos National Laboratory bore his name, and a newspaper article featured a photograph of him beside his jet car, with a sign in the backdrop identifying him as associated with the facility. Officially, however, Los Alamos denied his affiliation. This inconsistency set the stage for one of the initial puzzles in his saga. Was he genuinely a part of the institution, or merely a contractor operating in its periphery? This oscillation between evidence and rejection encapsulated the pattern that characterized Lazar's existence. He perpetually seemed to traverse the divide between validation and obliteration, between a man armed with genuine knowledge and one accused of deceit. For those who later dismissed his testimony, his fluctuating credentials served as substantial grounds for skepticism. Yet, for advocates, it validated the notion that powerful entities had intervened to obscure his path. Long before the world deliberated over his authenticity, Lazar led the life of an unrelenting experimenter, constructing a particle accelerator in his home, utilizing salvaged materials and components. Friends recounted their astonishment upon entering his garage, greeted by enormous tubes, tangled wires, and whirring machines that seemed more suited to a laboratory than a suburban dwelling. He would animatedly discuss topics such as nuclear energy, advanced propulsion systems, and the potential of harnessing forces capable of revolutionizing transportation. This relentless drive, this insatiable curiosity, rendered Lazar both difficult to categorize and impossible to dismiss. He was not a product of institutional confines, but rather a figure defined by projects, each venture bold enough to seize attention, reckless enough to invite skepticism, and brilliant enough to suggest an intellect pursuing something far grander than itself. By the mid-1980s, Bob Lazar found himself navigating spheres where high technology intertwined seamlessly with government contracts. His roles afforded him glimpses into classified research, albeit rarely revealing the entire scope of those projects. Those familiar with him regarded him as both part insider and part outsider, someone entrusted with sensitive information, yet never fully integrated into the system's embrace. This ambivalent position aligned perfectly with his disposition. He never aimed to function as just another cog in an expansive machine. Rather, his desire was to observe, to absorb knowledge, to challenge boundaries, and when the moment called for it, to shatter the silence. Such was the landscape Lazar occupied before his name became synonymous with S4, a critical aspect to comprehend as it would later influence how the public received his revelations. Upon stepping into the limelight in 1989, the world did not see a faceless whistleblower clad in formal attire. Instead, they beheld a figure marked by contradictions. He was a scientist asserting credentials that could not be substantiated, a worker whose name appeared in lab directories that officials would later dispute, and an innovator who thrilled in attaching jet engines to cars for sheer enjoyment. Lazar embodied a persona both ripe for mockery, yet heavy with significance. His voyage toward the enigmatic was not a linear progression of accomplishments and accolades. It constituted a restless odyssey peppered with contradictions, each one muddling the boundaries between credibility and controversy. It was precisely this ambiguity that imbued his forthcoming proclamations with a unique gravitas. He was neither refined nor rehearsed. His speech emerged from someone who had beheld unsettling realities. Regardless of whether they chose to believe him, others struggled to overlook him. The stage was primed. Lazar's eccentric genius, his fraught background, and his transient but undeniable involvement at one of America's most covert laboratories converged into a composite portrait of a man poised on the brink of something far greater. The world would soon discover what that something entailed. In time, he would assert that his unquenchable thirst for experimentation and his shadowy employment history had ushered him into a program concealed amidst the arid landscapes of the Nevada desert, a domain where the edges of science, secrecy, and the unknown congealed into a singular entity. And when he opted to divulge this truth, his assertions would traverse beyond mere whispers, reaching millions through the voice of a journalist willing to take a chance. However, prior to the glare of television cameras and the obscurity of the pseudonym Dennis, there resided Bob Lazar, the man, the restless innovator, the outsider scientist. His existence had already been characterized by a thirst for knowledge and a penchant for controversy. It was merely a question of time before these defining traits were poised to intersect with the ultimate mystery of all. The road to S4. As the mid-1980s unfolded, Bob Lazar's trajectory took an unforeseen turn. His existence, rooted in audacious experiments and an unrelenting curiosity, had already distinguished him from his peers. Yet no amount of preparation could have equipped him for the recruitment that would pull him into one of the most secretive facilities in the United States. This fateful step that would usher him toward S4 began subtly, with a phone call. Lazar recounted how a contractor connected to various government programs reached out to him. The organization was EG&G, a defense and engineering firm deeply entwined with classified initiatives. Though their name appeared benign to the casual observer, within the defense sector, it resonated with gravity. What ensued, however, was no ordinary job interview. Lazar remembered a thorough vetting process, encompassing extensive background checks and inquiries that delved well beyond his qualifications and experience. He endured polygraph tests, discussions concerning his personal life, and probing about his loyalties. The screening was intrusive, crafted not just to verify his skills, but also to ascertain whether he could be entrusted with secrets concealed deeper than most could fathom. Upon completing the assessment, Lazar received word that he was to engage in highly classified work. Initially, the specifics remained vague. He comprehended only that it pertained to propulsion, a subject that piqued his interest immensely. Yet, what would ultimately unfold would catapult him far beyond the realm of conventional propulsion systems. His initiation into the clandestine domain commenced at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. There, secluded within a restricted section, small unmarked aircraft operated daily. These planes bore no military insignia, save for a red stripe gracing their fuselages. To those in the know, they were simply identified as Janet flights. Their purpose was unmistakable to insiders: to transport cleared personnel from Las Vegas to Groom Lake, a site more commonly recognized as Area 51. Each flight represented its own exercise in control. Lazar boarded alongside fellow employees, none of whom engaged in discussions about their respective assignments. A palpable tension permeated the atmosphere. Questions were eschewed, and it was widely understood that conversation was to remain limited. Trust gauged by silence. Once airborne, the aircraft veered northward over the desert, its windows revealing little more than expansive stretches of sand and rock beneath. The landing at Groom Lake itself was jarring. The facility stood heavily fortified, encircled by fencing and constant surveillance. Lazar illustrated the omnipresent security, a network of armed guards, checkpoints, and restricted areas. Even after securing clearance, his movements remained highly constrained. Groom Lake was a complex engineered for obscurity. Nevertheless, Groom Lake was not the destination of his appointment. Lazar would soon discern that the site for which he had been recruited lay in a location even more hidden. To the south of the main base, nested amid the hills, was another installation, S4. The transit to S4 carried its own veil of secrecy. Lazar was escorted there, his view intentionally restricted. The journey led him along desolate desert roads and into territories where the natural rock formations obscured the facility from sight. It was a passage not merely across distance, but through intricate layers of concealed security. Upon Lazar's arrival at S4, he was immediately captivated by how seamlessly it merged with the surrounding terrain. To an outsider, the complex would have appeared entirely undetectable. The hangar doors were ingeniously constructed at an angle into the hillside, their slope mirroring the contours of the desert landscape. Viewed from above, they resembled natural extensions of the rock formation. The deliberate design aimed not only to obscure the facility from visual inspection, but also to evade detection altogether. Entry into S4 was meticulously regulated, with identification badges, security screenings, and escorts that were both vigilant and constant. Even within the confines of the installation, Lazar's access was stringently limited. Information was provided on a strictly need-to-know basis, and he was shown only what was crucial for him to witness. The principle of compartmentalization ruled the environment. Each individual grasped only their specific segment of the overarching narrative. The ambiance inside S4 bore an echoing silence comparable to that at Groom Lake, yet it resonated with an even greater intensity. Personnel navigated the space with focused discretion. Conversations were kept to a minimum, doors were swiftly closed, and every movement seemed shrouded in the weight of unyielding oversight. For Lazar, the atmosphere was a far cry from any laboratory or workshop he had previously encountered. At this juncture, he had yet to behold the machines that would ultimately shape his narrative. That pivotal moment lay in the future, yet even without those revelations, S4 emanated an alien quality. It was a space meticulously carved out of secrecy, engineered to cradle something extraordinary. Lazar found himself introduced to briefing materials that hinted at the expansive scope of the program. Some documents referenced projects and research that transcended conventional military aviation. The language used was stark and the implications disquieting. Should the content hold any truth, it suggested the existence of a reality that remained virtually unconsidered by the majority of the world. Still, as with much of Lazar's account, uncertainty loomed overhead. Detractors would later assert that the documents were fabrications intended to mislead him or tests designed to gauge his reactions. Yet, supporters would remind others that the mere existence of such documents suggested he had been inducted into a program enveloped in extraordinary secrecy. For Lazar, the perception was unequivocal. Whatever S4 entailed, it was clearly not an ordinary facility. This was the path transporting him from an experimenter and tinkerer to an insider of a program that hovered precariously at the edge of scientific exploration and the unknown. His journey transitioned from McCarran's concealed sector to the fortified airstrips of Groom Lake and ultimately into the hills where S4 nestled in silence. Lazar's account of this evolution, the recruitment, the flights, the checkpoints, the clandestine facility, would become one of the cornerstones of his credibility. It was not solely the extraordinary assertions regarding flying crafts that captivated attention. Rather, the mundane particulars of procedure, security, and design proved equally compelling. These specifics resonated with whispered rumors surrounding Groom Lake, corroborated by subsequent reports and testimonials. The road to S4 was not simply a traverse across miles of arid desert. It was a transition into a realm defined by secrecy, where truth and fabrication intertwined. For Lazar, this journey signified the inception of an experience that would shape his existence and polarize public perception for years to come. From the instant he set foot inside, everything began to change dramatically. Whatever doubts lingered regarding what he was entering, whatever uncertainties clung to him from a contested past, they had now become secondary. He found himself inside, selected, evaluated, and positioned within a program concealed from the wider world. Outside, the desert maintained its quietude, its hills sheltering the angled doors of the facility. Beyond those doors, Lazar would later assert, were the objects that would transform speculation into revelation. Yet, before that transformative moment, before he laid eyes on machines never before seen by human beings, there was the journey, a passage marked by secrecy, silence, and the heavy weight of clandestine purpose. The road to S4 was no mere coincidence, but the chosen path of a man whose life already balanced precariously between scientific inquiry and controversy. For Bob Lazar, this was a threshold moment. For the broader public, it would evolve into the backdrop for some of the most remarkable claims in the history of UFO phenomena, the hangars of the desert. When Bob Lazar recounted his experiences at S4, the moment that garnered the most intrigue was not the briefings or the security measures, but rather the instant he described stepping through the hangar doors and witnessing what lay within. For years, the Nevada desert had become a canvas for speculation. Lights in the sky, unidentifiable shapes glimpsed from afar. Yet according to Lazar, what he saw was vastly more than mere whispers. He depicted the facility as constructed directly into the hillside, the hangars obscured at an angle that harmonized with the natural rock. To any gaze from outside, S4 appeared almost non-existent, camouflaged against the arid landscape. Inside, however, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Bright industrial lighting bounced off smooth surfaces, illuminating the hangars that felt controlled, clean, and eerily quiet. It was in this carefully curated environment, Lazar asserted, that he first encountered the objects that would come to define his narrative. Lining the floor of the hangar, he found crafts unlike any he had previously encountered. These were not jets. They bore no resemblance to experimental aircraft as understood in conventional terms. Lazar claimed to have observed 9 flying discs, each possessing slight variations, meticulously arranged within the depths of the facility. Their designs were smooth, seamless, distinctly alien. One craft, positioned in a manner revealing a section of its interior, caught his attention particularly. Another rested on supports, its underside entirely exposed. Some of these crafts were smaller, others incrementally larger, as though they had been gathered from varied sources or represented different iterations of a singular design. Notably, none displayed markings, insignia, or rivets. To Lazar, they appeared as if they had never been constructed in the traditional manner associated with human engineering. They appeared, in his reflections, as if not fashioned by any human hands. The spectacle was astonishing. In that instant, all the protocols, the layers of confidentiality, and the preparatory sessions crystallized into something substantial. This was the very essence of what the facility was designed to safeguard. This was the objective that the guards, the escorts, and the pervasive silence sought to preserve. Lazar fixated particularly on one craft, a disc he would later classify as the sport model. It presented a sleek surface with a rounded top and a level base. Its design resonated with the accounts shared by witnesses globally for decades, a quintessential flying saucer, long caught in a web of both mockery and intrigue. Encountering it in reality, Lazar expressed, was both exhilarating and disconcerting. The intricacies of his narrative bore significance as they transcended mere vague illustrations. He articulated dimensions, the elegance of curves, and how light danced across the craft's exterior. He pointed out the lack of seams or welding, imparting the impression that the craft had somehow been molded from a singular entity. These were not the musings of a person regurgitating hearsay. They were the insights of one who stood close enough to perceive every nuance. As he traversed the hangar, Lazar observed that not every disc bore identical features. Some exhibited varied shapes and subtle alterations in form. In his mind, this suggested that the assembly had not been constructed in a singular location, but rather gathered, possibly retrieved from diverse incidents. If this theory held merit, it implied a far-reaching program, not merely the examination of one craft, but rather many, each potentially unearthed under circumstances concealed from the public eye. Lazar's response encompassed more than mere astonishment. It was tinged with trepidation. Standing in front of vehicles that flouted recognition inside a covert facility, he felt the gravity of what lay before him. It was not solely the thrill of discovery that animated him. It was the awareness that he had ventured into a realm far beyond conventional science, into an enigma that bore repercussions he could yet scarcely fathom. The atmosphere within the hangar augmented this sensation. Security was omnipresent. Access was rigorously regulated, down to the minutest detail. Personnel moved with a subdued efficiency, each person absorbed in their assigned task, each tethered to the same vow of silence. Dialogue was seldom tolerated, and inquiries were discouraged. In such an environment, the presence of the discs became all the more prominent. They were anomalies, extraordinary machines concealed within a stark, regulated setting. Lazar later recounted this moment as the true confirmation of the reality into which he had been drawn. The briefings he had perused hinted at remarkable technology, but witnessing the crafts firsthand allowed no room for conjecture. Before him stood irrefutable evidence that the world he had inhabited was but a fragment of something larger. Detractors would later contend that his portrayal of the crafts aligned too perfectly with the prevalent image of UFOs, this flying saucer mythos entrenched in culture since the middle of the 20th century. Advocates would argue that this was the very crux of the matter, that witnesses throughout the ages had been describing authentic machines, and here was an individual affirming their existence from within a facility intended to obscure them. Setting aside the contentious discussion, the strength of Lazar's narrative resided within the details. He conveyed not as an aficionado or a purveyor of tales, but as someone elucidating what he had physically encountered. He did not revolve around speculative theories. Instead, he referenced hangars, industrially polished floors, and discs aligned side by side under blinding lights. He recounted dimensions and angles of machines that loomed silently as if poised for something. One moment that resonated deeply within him was the experience of approaching a craft, estimating it to stand at about 15 feet tall and 50 feet in diameter. It was sizable enough to accommodate a crew, yet compact when juxtaposed against traditional aircraft. Its symmetry was flawless, almost biological in its precision. It was at once simplistic and otherworldly. The implications were immense. If these truly were devices not birthed from human ingenuity, their existence in the Nevada desert hinted that the government wielded technology from beyond our planet. Alternatively, if they were the result of advanced human engineering, they represented a monumental advancement so profound that it remained shrouded from most scientists. In either scenario, the reality was nothing short of extraordinary. Standing in that hangar, Lazar later acknowledged, altered the course of his existence. Whatever reservations he bore regarding the program, whatever doubt lingered about his involvement, dissipated amidst the sight of what he observed. He recognized in that moment that he was entangled in something historic, something perilous, and something that could never simply be dismissed as commonplace. The shroud of secrecy enveloping S4 took on a sharper clarity after that first encounter. Every escort, closed door, and moment of stillness undeniably carried new significance. The guards were not merely safeguarding a site, they were veiling the greatest secret Lazar had ever stumbled upon. In subsequent years, his recounting of that pivotal experience in the hangar, where he first laid eyes on 9 discs, evolved into one of the most referenced and most contested testimonies in the annals of UFO lore. Skeptics probed why no imagery existed, why no additional verifiable witnesses stepped forward. Enthusiasts emphasized the consistency of his intricate details, noting the alignment of his descriptions with independent accounts and the dangers he faced in voicing his experience. Yet, in 1989, as he stood within S4, those debates were still in their infancy. In that fleeting moment, it was solely Lazar and the crafts. Motionless, polished, and unfathomable, they lingered in the desert hangar as though awaiting the world to acknowledge them. The hangars scattered across the desert were not simply storage spaces. They were sanctuaries of secrecy, locations where the line demarcating speculation from reality dissipated. For Lazar, they signified the irrevocable point of no return. From here, the narrative would shift from mere observations to direct engagement. The imminent task would draw him inside the craft, where he would scrutinize the systems propelling the discs, grappling with technology that appeared to defy the fundamental principles of physics. However, that belonged to the subsequent chapter of his tale. For the present, amidst the hangars of the desert, Bob Lazar professed to have witnessed what multitudes had only dreamt about, the silent existence of vessels that felt profoundly alien. Within the craft. The initial sighting of the discs at S4 was a breathtaking experience for Bob Lazar. Yet, what transpired afterward carried even greater significance. Standing in the hangar, face to face with these voiceless machines that clearly did not belong to Earth, was one thing, but being invited to step inside, to study them in detail, was an entirely different challenge. That was the mandate placed before him. Lazar articulated that his involvement at S4 was purposefully restricted, his role compartmentalized like that of his colleagues. He was not privy to the full objectives of the program, nor was he introduced to the entirety of the personnel involved. His single directive was to investigate and strive to reverse engineer the propulsion system of one specific craft. The craft he examined most intimately was one he referred to as the sport model. Though smaller than many of the other vehicles, it was a fully realized entity. It rested on the hangar floor with its underbelly exposed, allowing access to those designated to probe its mysteries. Lazar vividly remembered his inaugural entry into the craft. The door, narrow and unassuming, seamlessly integrated into the surface of the vessel. Upon its opening, he discovered an interior that bore no resemblance to any machine he had previously encountered. The first sensation was one of smoothness. The structure held no rivets, bolts, or welds visible to the eye. The walls flowed in a continuous curve, creating the illusion that the craft had been sculpted from a singular piece of material. There were no apparent controls, no wiring, nothing that one could associate with human innovation. The surfaces exhibited a uniform hue and texture, almost resembling something organic. The measurements within struck Lazar as peculiar. The ceilings were low, the compartments constricted, as if designed for beings smaller than human frames. Although he could navigate the interior of the craft, it was not an experience of comfort. The space felt confined, as if geared toward occupants who were less broad, perhaps altogether different in form. Dominating the interior was the reactor, the essential core of the system Lazar had been assigned to investigate. He described it as a compact, smooth, metallic device resting on a humble pedestal. It emitted no sound, radiated no heat, and displayed no visible energy when dormant. Yet, he was informed that this apparatus was the power source, the engine facilitating movements beyond the capabilities of any human aircraft. 3 devices, which Lazar labeled gravity amplifiers, were affixed around the reactor in a triangular configuration. Each had the capability to pivot and direct the gravitational field produced by the core. Together, they constituted the craft's propulsion system. According to Lazar's account, these amplifiers could warp spacetime itself, engendering a distortion that permitted the craft to maneuver not via conventional thrust, but by manipulating the very essence of the spatial environment. Central to this revolutionary system was a substance interpreted by Lazar as element 115. At that moment, this element was still a mystery to scientific understanding and did not appear on the periodic table. Lazar asserted that it functioned as the reactor's fuel. Small amounts were incorporated into the system, where they generated a formidable gravitational effect when subjected to proton bombardment. The outcome was a regulated distortion, a bending of space that could be guided by the amplifiers. The implications of this were astounding. If Lazar's claims held any validity, it suggested the craft operated without reliance on combustion, jet propulsion, or rocket power. It did not push against the air or discharge fuel. Rather, it played with gravity, descending into distortions it created. The vessel could accelerate instantaneously, alter its trajectory without experiencing inertia, and do so in utter silence. In Lazar's language, this mechanism rendered traditional aeronautics obsolete. Inside the craft, he noted intricate details that intensified his sense of alienness. The flooring was metallic, featuring a subtle texture. Walls seamlessly flowed into the ceiling, void of conventional seating as humanity would conceive it, yet comprising small formations that implied seating arrangements designed for smaller passengers. He encountered neither switches nor dials nor panels crowded with controls. The environment was strikingly minimalist, almost sparse, suggesting that the operational demands on its users were extremely minimal. Lazar acknowledged that much of what greeted his eyes eluded his comprehension. Although schooled in propulsion physics, this technology diverged vastly from anything he had previously studied. He endeavored to correlate human concepts of technology with the reactor and the amplifiers, only to swiftly realize that the underlying principles transcended the boundaries of contemporary science. It was akin to gazing upon the culmination of a process entirely ignorant of the intervening steps. To him, the most profound realization was not merely that the craft existed, but that it had been meticulously engineered. It was not a coincidence or a naturally occurring phenomenon. It stood as a machine crafted with precision, powered by a foundation of forces humanity had only begun to imagine. He believed it was tangible evidence of engineering from beyond our world. The experience of working inside the craft was far from casual. Security measures were ever present. Lazar was under constant escort, closely monitored, constantly reminded of the critical nature of his task. Interactions with colleagues were restricted. Each individual was aware only of their specific responsibilities, with sharing beyond that strictly prohibited. Nevertheless, through fleeting exchanges, Lazar gleaned that others were engaged in different facets of the project, including navigation, materials analysis, and biological research. If this was indeed the case, it suggested that the program was expansive, encompassing not only propulsion, but every element of the craft's intricate design. Lazar's revelations regarding element 115 evolved into one of the most debated aspects of his testimony. At that juncture, no element of such nature had yet been catalogued. Detractors dismissed it as sheer fantasy. Yet, in 2003, scientists achieved the feat of synthesizing element 115, granting it the moniker Moscow. While its existence was fleeting, confined to laboratories for merely fractions of a second, the accomplishment ignited fresh scrutiny regarding Lazar's assertions. He had articulated the presence of this element over a decade prior, remarking on its stability in a form previously unknown to contemporary science. To those who supported him, this discovery served as a form of validation. Conversely, skeptics deemed it mere coincidence. The specifics Lazar disclosed about the craft's interior became pivotal in these ongoing controversies. Critics contended that his accounts bore too much resemblance to elements of science fiction and aligned closely with the cultural imagery surrounding UFOs. Advocates countered that the consistency of such depictions, emanating from witness testimonials to artistic representations, arose from genuine phenomena, positing that Lazar's narrative fit seamlessly because it stemmed from authenticity. Regardless of the ongoing contention, the imagery Lazar crafted remained striking and vivid. He articulated a machine that thrived not on sheer force, but rather on an elegant efficiency. He depicted a reactor no larger than a basketball, energizing a craft that executed impossible maneuvers. His descriptions suggested an interior tailor-made not for humans, but for beings smaller in stature, whose needs dictated the design of their environment. He elaborated on a mechanism that manipulated fundamental forces of nature, bending the very fabric of space in order to facilitate travel. The emotional imprint of entering the craft lingered long with Lazar. He confessed to experiencing a profound sense of awe, even trepidation. It was not solely the advanced technology that unsettled him, but the implications it wrought. Should these machines indeed exist, humanity was no longer solitary. If they had been retrieved, it meant visitors from elsewhere had already set foot on Earth. And if the government were engaged in studying these crafts, then the most significant secret of modern history resided not among the stars, but deep within the Nevada desert. For Lazar, this marked the juncture where speculation crystallized into undeniable reality. The hangars had unveiled the craft to him, the interiors provided glimpses into their design, and the reactor coupled with amplifiers suggested their operational mechanisms. What remained was to observe these creations in action, to see how the principles conceived on paper transformed into flight across the expanse of the sky. Lazar asserted this too would come. Inside that craft, he stood at the threshold between the known and the unknown, a physicist encountering a system that transcended all he understood about physics. He was an outsider, invited into the depths of secrecy, tasked with examining a machine that hinted at answers to questions humanity was just beginning to contemplate. In his estimation, it was the most extraordinary assignment of his life, one that would soon thrust him not only into the heart of the UFO enigma, but also into the maelstrom of controversy that would follow for years on end. Night vigils in the desert. Following his entry into the craft at S4, Bob Lazar's existence acquired an unprecedented significance. The secrecy surrounding him was absolute, surveillance was incessant, and the knowledge he carried was unlike any he had ever envisioned. Yet, Lazar's disposition was not one suited for silence. His instinctive restlessness, defiance, and tendency towards risk propelled him to make a decision few would dare in his position. He determined to share his extraordinary experiences. Initially, he did not approach the media. Instead, he confided in his closest friends, revealing to them that the government was conducting tests on advanced craft within the desert, machines beyond the reach of human understanding. Though his friends reacted with skepticism, Lazar stood firm in his conviction, asserting that he could substantiate his claims. So, on those moonlit nights, he guided them into the heart of the Nevada desert, directing their gaze skyward over Groom Lake. The site was chosen with care. Along secluded roads and elevated ridges, there were vantage points from which the restricted airspace over Groom Lake could be observed. Lazar shared with his friends that if they arrived on designated nights, they might witness the craft engaging in test flights. These were not mere wild guesses. Working at S4 offered him insight into the timings of these experimental outings. On those evenings, the group assembled, equipped with cameras, binoculars, and anticipation simmering quietly. They parked along desolate stretches of road, the chill of the desert air enveloping them, the silence only disturbed by the rustling wind and the occasional calls of nocturnal wildlife. Minutes melted into hours in the stillness. Then, unexpectedly, the lights began to manifest. Lazar's friends recounted seeing luminous objects ascending silently from the arid ground. Initially, the lights appeared distant, almost indistinguishable, but as they climbed, their movements became clearer. The lights darted, hovered, and shifted in ways that no conventional aircraft could possibly manage. They accelerated instantaneously, halted without gradual deceleration, and maneuvered at angles that contradicted the laws of inertia. To the onlookers, the acrobatics were not merely anomalous, they appeared impossible. One friend described the glowing light as possessing an unwavering brilliance, unlike the flickering of a helicopter or plane. Another recalled the object tilting sharply before shooting upward into the night with complete silence, devoid of any exhaust trail. The absence of sound was as striking as the visual phenomena. Whatever these entities were, they glided through the air without the roar of engines or the thunderous noise of aircraft. On at least one occasion, they captured footage with a video camera. Though the resulting film was grainy and shaky, it documented luminous orbs executing abrupt angular maneuvers in the desert sky. While the evidence fell short of being definitive, it became an integral part of Lazar's burgeoning collection of proof. For him, it represented a small yet essential affirmation that the craft were authentic and that others had perceived them. Embracing friends in his venture bore considerable risk. Groom Lake was under constant surveillance. On one particular night, Lazar recounted, they found themselves detected by security and subsequently pursued by military vehicles. He detailed the heart-pounding moments of evading capture, headlights slicing through the desert night, acutely aware that discovery could result in the loss of his clearance. Or worse. Despite the looming peril, the nocturnal watches persisted. For Lazar, it transcended mere thrill. It became a conduit through which he could share the heavy burden of knowledge, demonstrating to others that the secret was not his alone to bear. His friends, individuals living ordinary lives without privileges to classified information, had now transformed into eyewitnesses. They could no longer write off his accounts as fabrications. The shimmering lights in the desert sky had captivated their gaze, leaving them with undeniable proof. These encounters blurred the boundaries that separate insiders from whistleblowers. Lazar, still employed and bound by stringent security protocols, had maneuvered his way beyond their grasp. Rather than leaking secrets to journalists or researchers, he discreetly shared classified insights with friends armed with cameras. The moment those cameras rolled, the stakes of exposure intensified. However, the reports of unusual lights flickering across the Nevada desert were not confined to Lazar's immediate circle. Local inhabitants, truck drivers, and wayfarers traversing the highways near Groom Lake recounted similar experiences. They described glowing discs traversing the night sky, moving deftly and silently. Some of these accounts perfectly aligned with the nights Lazar disclosed as hosting the tests. This confluence of sightings bestowed additional credibility upon his narrative. Had his friends been the sole witnesses to these lights, their accounts might have been easily dismissed as exaggerations. Yet, with independent testimonies circulating throughout the same vicinity, the notion that something extraordinary was occurring became increasingly difficult to disregard. For Lazar, these nocturnal ventures marked a critical juncture. They transformed his story from a solitary testimony into a collective experience. Others bore fragments of the secret alongside him. Having glimpsed the evidence with their own eyes, albeit through distant, grainy footage, these witnesses became part of a truth that could no longer be stifled. The repercussions loomed large within S4. A growing suspicion hung in the air. Security measures tightened, and Lazar sensed the pervasive watchfulness. he was acutely aware of the consequences that accompanied his burgeoning notoriety. Surveillance outside the base intensified. Telephones clicked as if recording his every move. Vehicles trailed him, and an unshakable impression of being monitored settled upon him. By guiding friends into the desert, he had irrevocably crossed a line. Transitioning from a mere insider with clearance to someone under scrutiny posed a significant liability. Nonetheless, he held steadfast to his convictions. The lights his friends had witnessed, the footage they had documented, and the maneuvers they described all reinforced what Lazar had long been certain of. The craft were authentic. They were engaged in testing, and the world had a right to know. The ambiance of those nights lingered in the minds of the witnesses. For them, this was not merely an unusual spectacle. It shattered the veneer of normalcy. While standing in the desert, their eyes transfixed upon the silent disks that defied the laws of physics, they felt the line delineating the ordinary from the extraordinary dissolve. This experience was indelible, forever imprinting each participant with memories of lights that glided in ways beyond human engineering. Decades later, those who had accompanied Lazar on those desert outings still recounted their experiences. They reminisced about the thrill, the trepidation, and the astonishment of witnessing luminous objects dance through the skies over Groom Lake. Regardless of their beliefs regarding the entirety of Lazar's broader narrative, they could not refute the reality of the lights. For the expansive UFO community, Lazar's recounting of those night watches solidified his credibility. They represented independent observers, individuals untainted by preconceived stakes in the discourse who had seen and recorded anomalies resonating with his assertions. To skeptics, the visual documentation might have come across as inconclusive, the testimonies fraught with anecdotal shortcomings, yet for believers, it delivered precisely the sort of validation that frequently eludes UFO cases. The night watches bore, moreover, a symbolic resonance. They illustrated Lazar's insistence on breaking his silence, his compulsion to divulge what he was observing despite the inherent risks. They marked the pivotal moment when the secret began to seep beyond the confines of S4, transitioning from concealed hangars to burgeoning public awareness. In the desert's shadowy embrace, the glowing disks forged paths not only across the night sky, but also through the annals of history. They served as the connection between Lazar's insider knowledge and the imminent disclosure to unfold. The friends who stood beside him, the cameras trembling in their grasp, the patrols surging down the roads, each element wove together within the larger tapestry of a story poised to explode across television screens. For Bob Lazar, those desert night watches transcended mere displays. They emerged as irrefutable evidence that the technology was authentic, that the crafts were airborne, and that he was not alone in his revelations. And for George Knapp, poised to relay Lazar's revelations to countless households, these encounters constituted the initial stride towards a revelation destined to ignite a new chapter in modern UFO history. Meeting George Knapp. As the spring of 1989 unfolded, Bob Lazar navigated boundaries he could never retreat from. He had witnessed the disks at S4, analyzed their propulsion systems, and invited friends to the desert to observe the test flights. Whispers spread like wildfire. Security tightened around him, a palpable tension in the air. He began to sense that his days within the program were numbered. If he intended to speak out, he required a voice robust enough to propagate his revelations into the public sphere. That voice belonged to George Knapp. Knapp was not a UFO aficionado. He was a journalist, a dedicated investigative reporter affiliated with KASTV Channel 8 in Las Vegas. Born in 1952, Knapp cultivated a reputation for pursuing stories that others shied away from. His reputation in the newsroom was characterized by seriousness, a knack for delving into corruption, and a commitment to verifiable evidence over sensational storytelling. He was not a man who trafficked in hearsay, but one who sought proof. By the late 1980s, Knapp had already achieved familiarity amongst the Las Vegas populace. His Emmy-winning investigative work focusing on politics and crime afforded him credibility few dared to challenge. He navigated his professional landscape with a calm, steady demeanor, measured, contemplative, and rarely swayed by emotional responses. To those who knew him, he stood in stark contrast to the typical archetype, eager to pounce on UFO narratives. This only rendered what transpired next all the more astonishing. Knapp first became aware of Lazar through local researchers and enthusiasts who had caught wind of his assertions. They spoke of a man who claimed to have worked on discs at a facility located south of Area 51, a man who alleged knowledge of test flight schedules and who had brought friends into the desert to witness them firsthand. At first, Knapp brushed the account off as yet another extravagant narrative from the fringe. However, as he delved further into Lazar's assertions, he began to perceive a distinction. Lazar articulated his experiences with remarkable detail and specificity, presenting a story imbued with the kind of precision seldom matched by mere rumor. Intrigued, Knapp arranged to meet with him. Their initial encounter was marked by tension. Lazar was understandably apprehensive about exposure. He understood that revealing his identity could jeopardize not only his career, but also his freedom and safety. On the other side of the table, Knapp meticulously weighed the potential dangers to his own reputation. If Lazar turned out to be fabricating the story, broadcasting his claims would devastate years of hard-earned credibility. Yet, as they conversed, Knapp sensed he was not in the presence of a mere storyteller, but rather a man who bore the weight of experience. Determined to proceed with caution, Knapp decided that the inaugural broadcast would conceal Lazar's identity. His face would be shrouded, his name omitted, and his voice electronically modified. On viewers' screens, the figure manifested as a silhouette, introduced simply as Dennis. Regardless of the disguise, the testimony resonated deeply. Lazar recounted his time at a facility located south of Area 51, detailing advanced crafts with propulsion systems that defied the known laws of physics and programs carefully ensconced in layers of secrecy. He did not deliver allegations as a theorist might. Instead, he spoke with the authority of a first-hand witness. The broadcast, released on KAS-TV in May 1989, was a departure from anything local television had previously aired. For decades, murmurings about Groom Lake circulated among enthusiasts, but they had never been articulated with this level of detail and subdued confidence. Knapp infused the story with gravitas, presenting it not as mere fantasy but as a narrative merit worthy of serious attention. The audience reaction was immediate, with an influx of phone calls flooding the station. Some mocked the account, branding it as absurd, while others expressed relief, feeling validated by someone finally voicing their long-held suspicions. Interest surged, transcending Nevada's confines and capturing national attention. Within days, Lazar made the defining choice that would etch his name in UFO folklore. He stepped into the limelight, casting aside the cloak of anonymity to reveal his full identity, his visage, and his assertions. The stakes were immense. Lazar felt compelled to unveil the truth, while Knapp stood ready to amplify it. For Knapp, this moment signified a pivotal juncture in his profession. By bringing Lazar onto the airwaves, he ventured into a realm few mainstream journalists would dare to explore, intertwining his own standing with the narrative surrounding UFOs, claims of recovered vehicles, and governmental obscurity. In the media landscape, many would have skirted the subject entirely. Knapp chose instead to lean into it, believing that even if some specifics remained unverified, the consistent earnestness of Lazar's account rendered it newsworthy. The alliance forged between Knapp and Lazar endowed the latter's narrative with a sense of weight it could never have attained in isolation. Absent Knapp's backing, Lazar risks being dismissed as merely a local eccentric, his insights dissipating into the realm of hearsay. Lacking Lazar's revelations, Knapp would have missed the testimony that turned UFO secrecy into a matter worthy of national discourse. Together, they orchestrated a moment too significant to overlook. The broadcasts transmitted more than mere words. They conveyed a profound imagery. Audiences saw the silhouetted figure of Dennis, heard the digitally altered voice, and felt the tension of a long-held secrecy coming to light. Just days later, they witnessed the emergence of Bob Lazar, young and unconventional, speaking plainly about machines that stepped beyond the boundaries of physics. The dichotomy was striking. The enigma now possessed a tangible identity. Government representatives swiftly rebuffed Lazar's claims, releasing pointed denials of the existence of disc-shaped crafts, while simultaneously dismissing any connection between Lazar and advanced aerospace programs. Skeptics scrutinized his background, highlighting the absence of documentation detailing his educational and occupational history. Critics marginalized his narrative as a fabrication, yet the repudiations did little to quell the growing momentum. The broadcasts had already seized public fascination, transforming Area 51 from a whisper among enthusiasts into a name that surged into millions of households, now inseparably linked to allegations of extraterrestrial technology. Meanwhile, Knapp embarked on a deeper investigation. He interviewed colleagues who corroborated Lazar's affiliation with Los Alamos. Even as the laboratory denied his employment, Knapp diligently pursued documentation, consulted witnesses, and meticulously pieced together the emerging evidence. His investigative impulses evolved the narrative from a fleeting broadcast into a dense body of supporting material. For Lazar, the choice to go public signified a dual reality of freedom and peril. By unburdening himself of the secret, he attracted the full gaze of the forces he feared most. Surveillance escalated, and he reported incidents of being followed, his phones monitored, and his life thoroughly disrupted. Critics derided him, while supporters rallied in defense of his claims. Throughout this tumultuous period, George Knapp remained a steadfast force, committed to advancing the story. This chapter in their journey centered not on intricate technicalities, but on the essence of revelation. It marked the juncture where whispers transformed into broadcasts, where the shadowed figure known as Dennis evolved into Bob Lazar, and where a respected journalist opted to risk everything to amplify the voice of a whistleblower. Together, they reshaped the landscape of the UFO enigma, elevating what had once been relegated to the periphery to the forefront of national discourse. The desert no longer remained silent. Its secrets resounded across the airwaves. From that moment onward, the conversation surrounding UFOs in America irrevocably changed. When Bob Lazar publicly unveiled his identity and image, the immediate impact was profound. The previously quiet figure, known solely as Dennis in the initial broadcast, transformed into a living, tangible individual, boldly endorsing claims of concealed crafts at the facility south of Area 51. His voice, steady and resolute, conveyed the gravity of someone who insisted on the veracity of his experiences. Yet, this decision ushered in consequences that were unavoidable. The first response from officials was swift denial. Representatives categorically dismissed his account, asserting that the government did not possess craft resembling discs. They refuted the existence of S-4 and denied any association with Lazar concerning advanced aerospace initiatives. What he articulated, officials fervently asserted, was sheer fabrication. Yet it was not solely his assertions that faced scrutiny. His personal history was also thrust into the spotlight. Investigators combed through records, seeking validation of his educational background. Lazar consistently claimed he had attended both the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology, detailing professors he had learned from and courses he had taken. However, when records were sought, not a single trace could be uncovered. No transcripts were available, no enrollment records existed, and not one photograph appeared in any yearbook. It was as though he had never passed through the halls of either institution. To skeptics, this evidence was damning. They contended that Lazar had fabricated his educational credentials to lend credence to an outlandish narrative. For them, the absence of documentation signified not concealment, but rather exposure of his deceit. If he had falsified his educational achievements, why should any aspect of his testimony warrant belief? Conversely, a faction believed that the missing records hinted at a more sinister agenda. They posited that Lazar's history had been meticulously erased. His assertions, they maintained, were too intricate and precise to be mere invention. The disappearance of his academic credentials was thus not indicative of falsehood, but of a calculated cover-up. If the government concealed craft at S4, they reasoned, it would be a straightforward task to obscure the individual who dared to disclose information about them. This tug-of-war between denial and suppression emerged as a pivotal conflict in Lazar's narrative. Each missing record, each inconsistency, every authoritative disavowal turned into either proof of deception or evidence of deliberate erasure, depending upon the viewer's perspective. Questions surrounding his employment records echoed similar doubts. Lazar maintained he had been employed at Los Alamos National Laboratory. A local newspaper article from 1982 even showcased him beside his jet-powered car, identifying him as a laboratory physicist in the accompanying caption. Further, a telephone directory from the facility included his name. Yet, when pressed for details, officials denied he had ever been part of their staff. Once again, the contradiction was glaring. Documented evidence and eyewitness accounts pointed towards his involvement, while institutional records staunchly insisted otherwise. Amidst the denials, Lazar started to sense the oppressive weight of surveillance. He reported that his phone lines had been monitored, that unmarked cars trailed him through the streets, that he was consistently observed wherever he ventured. Friends noted the palpable unease that accompanied their interactions with him, pointing out subtle signs of observation, unmarked vehicles stationed nearby, inexplicable clicks interrupting phone calls, a constant awareness that their conversations might be overheard. Lazar recounted encounters that he interpreted as intimidation, with direct warnings communicated about the consequences of continuing to speak out, alongside overt threats directed at him. Despite this overwhelming pressure, he persevered in public discourse, although the strain was relentless. The omerta concerning S4 had merely shifted rather than vanished entirely. Public sentiment mirrored the division evident in official responses. For myriad individuals, Lazar emerged as a hero, the daring truth-teller who risked everything to expose humanity's cosmic solitude. Conversely, others dismissed him as a charlatan, capitalizing on the public's fascination with UFO phenomena to garner attention. He faced derision in the media while being venerated within UFO enthusiast circles, sparking endless debate. George Knapp found himself amidst this whirlwind. As the journalist who initially relayed Lazar's testimony, he bore the weight of dissecting the repercussions. He was acutely aware of the potential damage to his own professional reputation. Thus, he intensified his investigative efforts. Knapp sought out former colleagues from Los Alamos who, albeit quietly, confirmed Lazar's employment there, even as the institution cast doubt on its accuracy. He unearthed the directory listing that carried Lazar's name, diligently poring over newspaper clippings. Each fragment of evidence contributed to a narrative that suggested Lazar's past was intricately layered and not simply a construct of the critic's imagination. Amidst his inquiries, Knapp interviewed Lazar's friends who had shared those nights under the star-studded Nevada sky. Their consistent accounts spotlighted the unusual lights and enigmatic crafts soaring above Groom Lake, even capturing grainy video evidence of the phenomena. Knapp approached these testimonies with the same rigor he employed in his political investigations, carefully assembling and verifying every detail. As he delved deeper, Knapp began to identify a broader pattern. This phenomenon was not exclusive to Lazar. Across the tapestry of UFO encounters, whistleblowers had recounted analogous experiences: pressure, intimidation, and systematic erasure. Those who dared to assert knowledge of atypical crafts often reported feeling watched, experiencing harassment, or facing a vanishing of records that should have existed. Lazar's ordeal, whether entirely grounded in fact or partially embellished, resonated within a pervasive narrative of secrecy. Knapp recognized that the encasement of UFO data was not merely a matter of technological suppression, it extended into realms of control. Information became relegated to isolated compartments, records were hindered from public access, and witnesses were systematically discredited. Regardless of the truthfulness of Lazar's every statement, the mechanisms surrounding his case reflected experiences documented by others who had touched upon hidden operations. For Lazar, the fallout was profoundly personal. His career trajectory, once filled with promise, had unraveled dramatically. He could no longer be seen simply as a scientist or innovator. He was now the figure who claimed to have encountered flying saucers, his name forever entwined with controversy. Friends began to distance themselves, while strangers approached him with motives that vacillated between admiration and hostility. The burden of ridicule became a constant companion as skeptics lambasted him in both print and broadcast media. They highlighted the absence of degrees, the lack of official affirmation, and the inconsistencies that punctuated his narrative. The picture painted was one of a fantasist, a fraud, a man craving attention. Yet, Lazar persisted in his stance. His narrative consistently held firm, ensconcing familiar details and descriptions without deviating into the realm of embellishment. To his supporters, this steadfastness served as evidence of authenticity. The campaign against him transcended mere personal attacks. Lazar conveyed instances where attempts on his safety seemed orchestrated to instill fear. He recounted multiple incidents of break-ins at his home, portraying an enduring sense of being followed, his movements overshadowed by unseen observers. Whether genuine or merely a figment of his imagination, the mounting pressure seemed incessant. Knapp meticulously recorded these narratives. He conducted multiple interviews with Lazar, capturing his accounts through film. He curated an extensive archive filled with documents, eyewitness testimonies, and various forms of evidence. Knapp understood that even if the veracity of Lazar's assertions could never be irrefutably established, the narrative itself was woven into the fabric of history. It illuminated the convergence of secrecy, authority, and the enigmatic in a manner unparalleled by other cases. The contention surrounding Lazar evolved into a contentious issue within the UFO community. For a segment of the populace, he stood as the most significant whistleblower to have ever existed, the individual who disclosed the government's investigations into recovered spacecraft. Conversely, for others, he was nothing more than a distraction, a presence who complicated the dialogue with dubious claims that could not withstand scrutiny. Nevertheless, irrespective of personal belief, he could not be overlooked. In the ensuing years, the name Lazar became inextricably linked to Area 51. Prior to his revelations, Groom Lake was merely a whispered legend, a location discussed quietly amongst select individuals. Following his disclosures, it transformed into a powerful emblem, a representation of secrecy, the reputed site of concealed crafts, and a focal point of the UFO enigma. This metamorphosis was attributable not solely to Lazar himself, but also to George Knapp's commitment to amplify his words. Absent Knapp's involvement, the tale might have faded into obscurity. Instead, it burgeoned into a nationwide discussion. This upheaval transcended the credibility of an individual. It opened a debate centered on the very essence of secrecy. Should Lazar's claims be factual, it suggested that the government had concealed humanity's most extraordinary breakthrough. Conversely, if he was fabricating, then the swiftness and ferocity of the ensuing suppression still demanded a thorough investigation. What prompted the complete dissipation of a man's academic and employment history? Why did a research facility seem to erase all traces of his existence, even as directories and former colleagues affirmatively recognized him? Why was he surveilled, monitored, and intimidated if his allegations were mere fiction? These lingering inquiries persisted. They remained unresolved. Even today, they endure. Chapter 7 of Lazar's saga does not merely elucidate the substance of his claims, but highlights the tumult they stirred. The denials, the attempts to erase his existence, the derision, the intimidation, all painted a vivid tableau of a system intent on controlling the narrative. Whether such control aimed at concealing truth or simply quelling an inconvenient falsehood, the outcome was uniform. Lazar emerged as one of the most divisive figures in UFO history. Throughout this ordeal, George Knapp persevered in his undertaking. He managed the narrative with precision, constructing an investigative portfolio that sustained the discourse. He transformed from a reporter into an integral component of the very history he was chronicling. The consequences of the suppression did not render Lazar silent. Instead, they amplified his voice, allowing his assertions to resonate further, fueled by discord and propelled by denial. With each passing year, the narrative expanded. The desert remained quiet. The facilities at S4 continued to lurk in obscurity. The crafts, if indeed they existed, stayed hidden from the public gaze. Yet, the name Bob Lazar, amplified through the efforts of George Knapp, could no longer be consigned to oblivion. George Knapp's awakening to UFOs. When George Knapp first encountered Bob Lazar in 1989, he approached as a cautious journalist. Having dedicated his career to exposing political corruption and institutional failings, he grounded his reporting in verifiable facts. UFOs were far from his expertise. They represented a realm many journalists shunned, a territory fraught with the potential for ridicule. Knapp approached Lazar's account with a healthy dose of skepticism, conscious that illuminating it could jeopardize his reputation. However, once the broadcasts commenced, Knapp's trajectory altered dramatically. The response was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The phones at KAS erupted with inquiries. The story transcended the confines of Las Vegas. Area 51, once a name murmured in hushed tones, suddenly occupied the pinnacle of public discourse. Lazar's assertions sparked a wildfire, placing Knapp at its epicenter. For numerous journalists, this would have marked the conclusion of their engagement: report the story, weather the ensuing storm, then retreat back into safer topics. Knapp could have extracted himself, diminutive in framing Lazar's account as a mere oddity rather than a serious inquiry. Instead, he leaned into the fray. He began to regard the topic of UFOs with the same gravity he afforded to politics and crime. This choice not only reshaped his career, but altered the course of contemporary UFO history. Knapp's commitment to ongoing investigation came with its own set of challenges. Within the newsroom, some colleagues raised their eyebrows in disbelief. Covering UFOs was widely viewed as a career-ending move, the kind of narrative that branded a journalist as unreliable. The established media landscape had long derided the subject, and any reporter associated with it risked being scorned. Knapp recognized this reality, yet he also understood that Lazar's account, regardless of its authenticity, had unlocked a formidable door. Groom Lake and S4 were no longer mere whispers. They demanded to be addressed as front-page news. Once that door swung open, Knapp was unwilling to allow it to close again. He began amassing evidence. He interviewed Lazar's former colleagues from Los Alamos, gathering testimonies that quietly corroborated his time there. He meticulously archived every document he could retrieve, meticulously cataloging directories, newspaper clippings, and photographs. He returned to the witnesses who had stood beside Lazar on those desert nights, capturing their recollections of illuminated crafts gliding over Groom Lake. Each action carried inherent risk. Each segment aired further solidified Knapp's name with the discourse surrounding UFOs. Yet he pressed on, guided by the conviction that a story of such magnitude, the possibility that the government was engaging with crafts not of human origin, was crucial enough to warrant exploration. As Lazar's narrative rippled outward, Knapp began to discern connections. He recognized that the shroud of secrecy enveloping UFOs was not limited to Nevada. Emerging patterns echoed across the nation and even internationally. Witnesses recounted sightings of unfamiliar crafts. Military personnel reported encounters fraught with ambiguity. Government agencies issued refutations, obliterated records, or buried inquiries. The same themes Lazar articulated at S4 resonated beyond that singular location. Knapp, in his quest for deeper understanding, broadened his investigative lens. He actively sought out pilots, radar operators, and intelligence officers who had encountered phenomena they could not explain. He meticulously examined documents unveiled through the Freedom of Information Act, struggling to piece together the extent of governmental involvement. Knapp engaged with researchers who had devoted extensive time to unraveling the enigma, critically aligning their insights with the testimony Lazar provided. In this pursuit, Knapp's role began to evolve. He was no longer merely a journalist chronicling a singular whistleblower's tale. He was transitioning into a dedicated investigator of a larger, multifaceted phenomenon, meticulously weaving connections that spanned decades. A pivotal development in Knapp's career occurred during the 1990s when he received an invitation to probe a property in northeastern Utah, one that would soon become notorious: Skinwalker Ranch. This ranch was a nexus of mysterious occurrences, brimming with reports of UFOs, bizarre lights, animal mutilations, and additional anomalies that eluded straightforward explanations. Knapp made repeated visits to the site, diligently documenting events and conducting interviews with the ranch's owners. What he encountered there solidified his conviction that the UFO phenomenon was merely one piece of a much grander puzzle, one that transcended aerial crafts and delved into realms that challenged the very limits of established science. His reporting on Skinwalker Ranch, which he later co-authored in the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, cemented his legacy within UFO history. This work underscored that Knapp was not simply in pursuit of Lazar's narrative. Rather, he was resolutely committed to tracking the phenomenon wherever it emerged. As the years progressed, Knapp's standing in the UFO research community flourished. In contrast to many in the field, he brought the credibility associated with mainstream journalism. He approached witnesses with a profound respect, meticulously gathered documentation, and consciously sidestepped sensationalism. Such an earnest approach garnered him trust not only from enthusiasts, but also from insiders. Thus, when the Pentagon's covert program, known as the AATIP, or Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, came into the public eye in the 2000s, Knapp was among the select journalists granted access to its intricacies. He astutely reported on this program's connections to Skinwalker Ranch and its inquiries into unidentified aerial phenomena, contributing to the public realization that the U.S. government had, in fact, been quietly investigating the very occurrences officials had long dismissed. For Knapp, this disclosure served as a form of validation. The derision he had faced for covering Lazar's claims back in 1989 sharply contrasted with the official acknowledgement that these subjects merited serious examination at the highest echelons of government. By that stage, Knapp transcended the label of merely a journalist focused on a peculiar beat. He had emerged as a pivotal chronicler of UFO history. He hosted programs on Coast to Coast AM, the late-night radio show with an expansive reach. Additionally, he co-authored books that meticulously documented various cases and patterns. As a trusted voice in the realm of UFO discourse, he became a confidant for witnesses, offering them a safe space to share their experiences without fear of being ridiculed. His position was neither that of a believer nor a skeptic. It was that of a diligent recorder, someone dedicated to collecting testimonies, preserving evidence, and providing a platform for the phenomena he encountered. Yet, in fulfilling this role, he inevitably became ensconced in the historical narrative himself. The name George Knapp, once intertwined solely with Las Vegas reporting, now became irrevocably linked to UFO investigations. Knapp's evolution, often characterized as an awakening, was not a sudden transformation. It unfolded gradually, meticulously constructed piece by piece. It initiated with Lazar's revelation and the bold decision to air a story that could have jeopardized his career. It continued through years of in-depth investigation, with each step reinforcing the belief that beneath layers of denial lay something extraordinary. His journey expanded further with Skinwalker Ranch, Pentagon initiatives, and testimonies from witnesses across the globe. What defined Knapp's trajectory was not simply a matter of belief. It was the realization that the phenomenon he encountered was consistent and persistent, demanding serious scrutiny. His awakening transcended the mere possibility of UFOs. It was a recognition of the omnipresent secrecy that obscured the truth, that governments, institutions, and agencies worked relentlessly to manage the narrative. In this regard, Knapp mirrored Lazar's journey. Lazar had emerged as the insider who glimpsed the extraordinary and felt compelled to speak out. Knapp, in turn, became the journalist who listened intently, resolutely choosing not to dismiss the accounts shared with him. Each individual risked their reputation and personal safety to advance the narrative, with Lazar revealing what he claimed to have witnessed, and Knapp exhibiting the determination that it could not remain overlooked. By the late 2010s, as UFOs regained prominence in mainstream media through Navy pilot accounts and Pentagon confirmations, George Knapp stood as a venerated voice within the field. He had borne witness to the evolution of the Lazar narrative for decades, scrutinized Skinwalker Ranch, reported on AA-TIP, and earned recognition as a trustworthy figure in the ongoing discourse surrounding unidentified phenomena. For many aficionados, his journey served as validation of the subject's significance. Here was a seasoned journalist who had built his career on a foundation of credibility, someone with ample motive to disengage, yet who opted instead to dedicate decades to illuminating the phenomenon. His awakening was not merely a personal experience, it was cultural, contributing to the transformation of UFO discourse from scorn to acknowledgement. Ultimately, George Knapp's awakening intertwined with his own identity as much as it did with the study of UFOs. Starting as a cautious reporter, marked by skepticism and apprehension, he evolved into a pivotal figure in the annals of UFO history. His identity became intrinsically linked to this ongoing mystery, and his journey mirrored the overarching narrative of the subject itself. From whispered tales and denial to focused investigation and acknowledgement, Knapp did not initially embark on a path to become a historian of UFO secrecy. However, with Bob Lazar's arrival in his life, a new trajectory revealed itself, one that Knapp pursued with the indefatigable determination he applied to every story. His awakening represented more than just belief. It symbolized a profound responsibility, the understanding that some narratives, regardless of the obstacles, must be diligently carried forth for the world to grasp. The UFO technology discourse. From the outset, Bob Lazar's narrative comprised dual dimensions: the personal stakes associated with his decision to come forward and the remarkable assertions regarding the technology concealed within the Nevada desert. By the moment his name gained notoriety and his visage graced television screens, the scrutiny surrounding his history was already intensifying. Yet, it was the technical specifications he provided that ignited the most fervent discussion. Should they be accurate, they represented advancements beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. Conversely, if fabricated, they constituted an elaborate ruse. The cornerstone of Lazar's testimony was a substance previously unknown to contemporary science, element 115. He articulated it as the energy source behind the craft he examined at S4. In his account, when protons bombarded this element within the reactor, it elicited a powerful gravitational phenomenon. This effect powered the spacecraft's propulsion system, engendering a controlled warping of space-time itself. In 1989, this element had yet to make its mark on the periodic table, which only extended to element 114. To many in the scientific community, such a notion appeared preposterous. Critics contended that if such a material could exist, its volatility would render it unsuitable as a fuel source. They dismissed it as mere science fiction. Nevertheless, Lazar remained resolute, asserting the element's authenticity, claiming small quantities had been supplied to him in solid form at S4 and that it was vital to the functioning of the craft. He maintained that in the government's possession, it maintained stability, a form of the element unrecognized in scientific laboratories around the globe. Years later, in 2003, scientists achieved the synthesis of element 115, subsequently named muscovium. It was produced for mere fractions of a second before its decay. While it proved unstable and fundamentally unlike Lazar's description, its emergence on the periodic table reignited interest among his staunchest supporters. His references to it predated its confirmation by over a decade. Did this represent mere coincidence or validation? Skeptics argued it proved nothing, contending that Lazar had simply surmised the existence of higher-numbered elements, a prudent conjecture for anyone acquainted with the fundamentals of physics. For believers, however, the synchronicity was too significant to disregard. They interpreted it as proof that Lazar had indeed interacted with a stable form of the element, one yet to be unveiled by mainstream scientific inquiry. In addition to element 115, Lazar elaborated on the craft's propulsion mechanism, which featured 3 gravity amplifiers strategically positioned around a central reactor. He described how these devices could harness and direct the distortion generated by the reactor. By bending the very fabric of space-time, the craft operated without contesting the atmospheric medium or expelling exhaust. Rather than pushing against the air, it fell seamlessly into the distortion it created, allowing for movement that seemed impossible. This, according to Lazar, illuminated the sudden maneuvers observed during testing in the desert. The disks could achieve instantaneous acceleration because they were unburdened by inertia. They hovered silently because they generated no thrust. They could execute sharp turns, dart to angles of 90 degrees, and disappear into the sky because their movement transcended conventional aerodynamic limitations. To believers, this narrative resonated with decades of UFO sightings. Witness accounts across the globe had depicted objects performing hushed maneuvers that defied the known laws of physics. Here, Lazar offered a possible explanation for those phenomena. To critics, the rationale appeared flawed. They highlighted inconsistencies in Lazar's presentations, arguing that his conceptual framework contradicted established scientific principles. They pointed out that his explanations frequently misused terminology or oversimplified complex ideas. To them, it was evidence of fabrication, suggesting he was synthesizing concepts gleaned from speculative science and the realm of science fiction. The discussion became sharply divided. On one side stood skeptics, physicists, journalists, and officials who deemed Lazar a charlatan. They claimed his narrative was laden with discrepancies, lacking credentials, unverifiable documentation, and contradictions in his technical assessments. They insisted that if such technology were indeed under governmental control, it would invariably remain inaccessible to a solitary, unconventional scientist. Conversely, believers contended that the unwavering consistency in Lazar's account verified his authenticity. He had never strayed from his descriptions, never embellished nor modified his statements, despite enduring years of scrutiny. They pointed to his early reference to element 115 as evidence of his insider knowledge. They argued that his limited segmented exposure clarified gaps in his technical understanding. He was not fabricating. Rather, he was grappling with concepts profoundly beyond ordinary comprehension. At the core of the debate resided a singular monumental inquiry. If Lazar's assertions were accurate, what consequences would it entail? It would signify that the crafts he examined were not merely figments of imagination, but tangible products of extraterrestrial engineering. The immaculate design, their compact interiors tailored for beings of smaller stature, their operation without conventional controls, all of it suggested machines crafted for a species apart from humankind. It implied that propulsion had transcended an unanswered riddle, evolving into an art form perfected elsewhere. For supporters, this represented the groundbreaking reality humanity had long sought. For skeptics, it remained an account too extraordinary to accept without robust evidence. Part of the intrigue surrounding Lazar's assertions stemmed from his own limitations and vulnerabilities. He never claimed to possess all the answers. He openly acknowledged that much of what he witnessed surpassed his understanding. He endeavored to articulate his experiences using the language of physics, but often faltered, seeking the right terminology. He related principles rather than providing exhaustive equations, offering metaphors, akin to the way a ball would bend a taut sheet of fabric, rather than precise mechanical details. To detractors, this served as indictment of deception. To supporters, it functioned as validation of his sincerity. He articulated his experiences not as a scripted recitation, but as an individual grappling with ideas just beyond his grasp. George Knapp, keenly observing the unfolding debate, recognized its profound implications. He understood that Lazar's technical claims would elicit a division in opinion more pronounced than any other aspect of the discussion. But he was also acutely aware of the unusual consistency in Lazar's narrative. Over countless interviews, Lazar's account remained unchanged. He neither embellished nor withdrew. His story unfolded in the same steady tone, irrespective of who was listening. Knapp approached Lazar's statements with the gravitas befitting historical testimony. He meticulously recorded, safeguarded, and delivered them to the public as evidence to be analyzed rather than dismissed. Regardless of the accuracy of Lazar's assertions, Knapp perceived that the story illuminated critical truths about the intertwining of secrecy, science, and the enigmas that lie beyond our understanding. The discourse surrounding UFO technology persists into the present. Element 115 occupies a mysterious space on the periodic table. It is unstable under human experimentation. However, Lazar maintained that it exists in a stable state elsewhere. Gravity manipulation, while still largely aspirational, remains an avenue explored by physicists striving to decipher its mysteries. The maneuvers Lazar recounted resonate with contemporary military encounters involving unidentified aerial phenomena, silent, abrupt movements that defy conventional physics. Proponents interpret this as validation, definitive proof that Lazar had indeed described authentic spacecraft. Meanwhile, skeptics continue to posit that no substantial proof has ever materialized. The chasm between these viewpoints is stark and perhaps insurmountable. What remains indisputable is Lazar's profound impact on the UFO discourse, fundamentally transforming it. Prior to his involvement, the topic was frequently relegated to the realm of whimsical explanations, lights in the sky, and anecdotal accounts devoid of substance. Post-Lazar, the conversation evolved into one of engineering challenges. It became a dialogue that intricately wove together belief and scientific inquiry. Regardless of the veracity of his claims, Lazar reshaped the exploration of the subject, compelling scientists to confront the unsettling possibility that advanced technology beyond human comprehension might exist. He provided a lexicon rich with terms like reactors, amplifiers, and exotic elements. He transformed UFOs into not merely a fascination of the public, but a matter of scientific investigation. Should Lazar's assertions prove correct, the ramifications extend far beyond the realm of physics. This reality implies that governmental entities may have harbored knowledge for decades that we are not alone in the universe. It suggests that humanity might be on the brink of the most profound revelation in history, the incontrovertible evidence of other civilizations concealed within the expansive depths of secret hangars dug into arid desert landscapes. Humanity has been living in the shadow of a truth for far too long, a truth so disruptive that its revelation seems nearly impossible. If he was incorrect, the implications remain equally significant. It indicates that a person without tangible proof succeeded in altering the perceptions of millions about UFOs. His statements were potent enough to have enshrined Area 51 in the popular consciousness as a symbol of alien spacecraft. It suggests that once veiled secrets are brought to light, they cannot easily be suppressed regardless of their authenticity. In either scenario, the discourse continues. For Bob Lazar, the assertions regarding element 115 and gravity amplifiers have remained staunch and unwavering over the span of more than 30 years. For George Knapp, documenting and preserving those assertions became enmeshed with his life's purpose. They stand as one of the most extraordinary, contentious, and enduring enigmas in the annals of UFO history. By the dawn of the 1990s, the narrative surrounding Bob Lazar and George Knapp had transcended the confines of local television broadcasts. What began as a measured airing on a Las Vegas network had proliferated far beyond the borders of Nevada. It infiltrated households across the United States, eventually spanning the globe. For the first time, Area 51 shifted from mere whispers in desert towns to a cultural entity, a name steeped in the secrecy surrounding unidentified flying objects. Before Lazar's revelations, Groom Lake's existence remained largely unknown. Aviation historians and a select group of aficionados recognized it as a testing ground for experimental aircraft such as the U-2 and SR-71, yet it rarely garnered public discourse. After Lazar emerged, everything shifted. The phrase Area 51 seamlessly integrated into everyday vernacular, now linked not solely to clandestine aviation, but to alien technology. Television networks eagerly seized his narrative, producing documentaries that featured Lazar's testimony prominently. Literary works dedicated entire chapters to his experiences. Conferences began inviting him as a speaker, drawing substantial crowds yearning to hear from a man who claimed to have entered an extraterrestrial vessel. The imagery generated was compelling, as the secret base amidst the desert became a focal point of speculation, an arena where the most remarkable mysteries potentially lay hidden. Lazar's vivid descriptions of hangars secreted within hillsides, of discs resting in serene silence, conferred substance to the surrounding rumors. These portrayals crafted mental images that captivated audiences, allowing them to visualize, envision, and remember. In the midst of this cultural surge, George Knapp maintained his steady presence. He diligently continued his investigations with the same methodical approach that had characterized his career. While others capitalized on sensationalism, Knapp remained firmly grounded. He documented findings, interacted with witnesses, and ensured that Lazar's narrative endured, imbued with the seriousness it warranted. Knapp evolved into a recognizable figure within UFO media. He featured in documentaries, hosted late-night radio broadcasts, and partook in conferences. Yet, in stark contrast to many others within the field, he brought with him a credibility rooted deeply in mainstream journalism. As the individual who propelled Lazar's testimony into public consciousness, his words bore a weighty significance. To Knapp, this story transcended mere spectacle. It held historical significance. He understood that even if every detail of Lazar's assertions proved unverifiable, the cultural impact was indisputably profound. UFO secrecy had transitioned from being a niche topic to an integral part of mainstream discourse, firmly entrenched in the public's collective awareness. However, this sudden influx of attention was not without its drawbacks. Mainstream news outlets frequently approached the story with skepticism and ridicule. Late-night comedic hosts delighted in using it as fodder for humor. Area 51 became the subject of jests as readily as it sparked earnest discussions. For naysayers, Lazar became an easy target for derision, with his academic records apparently missing, institutional denials, and inconsistencies in his technical explanations, providing ample ammunition for criticism. They cast him as a charlatan and labeled his supporters as credulous. Even so, the ridicule carried its own repercussions. By transforming Area 51 into a topic of humor, it inadvertently ensured its persistence in the public consciousness. Jokes delivered on television, references woven into films, and caricatures of aliens, all of it solidified the intertwining connection between the base and unidentified flying objects. Whether met with laughter or belief, the enigma surrounding the Nevada desert took firm root within popular culture. In spite of the mockery, the transformation was irreversible. Prior to the emergence of Lazar, UFOs were commonly dismissed as mere lights flitting across the sky, the figments of imagination from those lacking credibility. With Lazar's revelations, however, the dialogue gained newfound substance. It transcended the simple question of what individuals might observe. It opened the door to the mysteries hidden within vast hangars, scrutinized in esoteric laboratories, and withheld from public gaze. The entire premise of the UFO discourse evolved. It shifted from mere belief into a narrative steeped in secrecy. Were governmental bodies concealing unparalleled technologies? Were whistleblowers facing efforts to silence them? Was humanity on the brink of acknowledging contact with extraterrestrial civilizations? This recontextualization reverberated across a broad spectrum. It ignited disclosure initiatives, spurred researchers into action, and lent sharpness to UFO studies. The enigma was no longer confined to the cosmos. It resided within courthouse documents, laboratory confines, and the clandestine facilities snuggled within the arid landscape. The cultural implications were extensive. Movies and television narratives drew heavily from the notion of undisclosed crafts stationed at Area 51. Iconic series such as The X-Files intertwined Lazar-like accounts into their plots, seamlessly integrating themes of secrecy, alien encounters, and government cover-ups. Film portrayals depicted covert installations safeguarding unidentified crafts, scientists grappling with alien technology, and whistleblowers dogged by shadowy figures intent on their silencing. These images swiftly became ingrained in popular imagination, largely because Lazar had drawn such vivid imagery. The portrayal he presented, often conveyed through George Knapp's steady lens, sculpted a recognizable narrative. Even those unfamiliar with his name could identify the motifs: a concealed base, craft that defy explanation, and scientists diligently seeking solutions. It coalesced into one of modern culture's most enduring myths. Conferences burgeoned, and UFO researchers designated Lazar as a pivotal individual in their inquiries. Believers touted his consistency as testimony, while skeptics pointed to the facets that contradicted their narratives. Yet, none could dismiss him. His account became a reference point, acting as a demarcation line within the field. The increasing mainstream acceptance of UFO phenomena accentuated the divide between faith and skepticism. To the skeptics, Lazar's notoriety served as a stark cautionary tale regarding the perils of uncorroborated testimony. Conversely, for believers, his story stood as testament that truth could triumph over suppression. Both factions saw in Lazar a mirror of their broader ideologies. Yet, it remained clear to all. Lazar had irrevocably altered the landscape of the conversation. He elevated UFO secrecy into something profoundly significant on a national scale. He consummately dedicated Area 51 to a celebrated cultural status. With Knapp's unwavering resolve, the narrative endured through the years. Decades later, the cultural influence of Lazar and Knapp is indisputable. Area 51 stands as a potent symbol invoked in cinema, video games, and literature. The ongoing governmental ambiguity regarding UFOs has now transcended dismissal, finding itself under the scrutiny of congressional hearings, Pentagon reports, and mainstream news outlets. Although Lazar opted to step out of the spotlight, establishing United Nuclear Scientific Supplies and leading a more private life, each time he does share his reflections, the same calm demeanor and unwavering narrative resurface. He remains steadfast. Meanwhile, Knapp has forged ahead, delving into subjects like Skinwalker Ranch, reporting on Pentagon initiatives, hosting radio shows, and establishing himself as one of the most trusted figures in UFO chronicles. Initially at risk for broadcasting Lazar's account, Knapp ultimately found himself defined by it. He embraced the topic, transforming from a cautious journalist into a highly regarded chronicler of this ongoing mystery. Together, they transitioned the UFO narrative from the outskirts of discourse into the heart of public conversation. The legacy produced during this chapter in their odyssey is not grounded in validating or discrediting claims, but rather in their impact. Lazar and Knapp reshaped the cultural narrative. They propelled UFO secrecy into the arena of serious discussion. They turned Area 51 into a household term and reformed the phenomenon from object of derision to one of acknowledgement. Regardless of whether one subscribes to Lazar's claims, his account, propelled forward by Knapp, altered the dynamics of the conversation. It granted UFOs a lasting position in contemporary history, no longer mere flickers in the sky, but latent aircraft concealed within the desert, awaiting understanding. That transformation persists. It permeates every mention of Area 51, informs every debate surrounding disclosure, and inspires cultural interpretations of hidden bases and extraterrestrial vessels. It manifests in the continuing enigma that refuses to dissipate. Lazar spoke. Knapp documented. The world evolved. Chapter 11 unfolds with Lazar and Knapp embarking on their modern journey. Following their revelations about S4, both men experienced a profound transformation. The saga originating in the Nevada desert did not diminish. It burgeoned, sending ripples through documentaries, conferences, cultural references, and never-ending debates. To Lazar, the resultant pressure felt stifling. To Knapp, it morphed into a vocation. Together, they ushered the UFO mystery into contemporary discourse, one as a hesitant participant, the other as an unwavering documentarian. After the initial surge of media interest, Lazar chose to retreat from the limelight. The role of a public figure had never sat well with him. The sudden notoriety paved the way for ridicule, doubt, and intense examination. His educational background and job history remained elusive, with officials persistently denying his assertions. For many, he became the most significant whistleblower in the annals of UFO history, or a deceiver orchestrating a grand illusion. The burden of this ongoing debate scarcely seemed to please Lazar. Thus, he sought solace in a quieter existence. Founding United Nuclear Scientific Supplies, he crafted a business specializing in rare materials, chemicals, and scientific instruments. This venture enabled him to remain engaged in scientific exploration without once more stepping into the glaring light of the UFO discourse. For many years, he sidestepped media inquiries, declining interview offers and shunning the temptation to rehash the controversies. Nevertheless, his silence did not erase the significance of his narrative. It endured, echoing through books, conferences, and the research efforts of those employing his accounts as foundational to understanding Area 51. His words, once shadowy, have now become interwoven in the tapestry of UFO history. While Lazar receded from the limelight, George Knapp emerged as a prominent figure in the unfolding narrative. This seasoned journalist, who bravely jeopardized his career in 1989 to broadcast Lazar's revelations, continued his deep dive into the enigma of unidentified aerial phenomena. His investigations extended far beyond the borders of Nevada, encompassing cases from the eerie Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, with its bizarre lights and inexplicable occurrences, to clandestine Pentagon initiatives engaged in the scrutiny of unidentified aerial crafts. Knapp's unwavering dedication afforded him a distinctive position within the UFO community. Unlike numerous researchers operating on the fringes, he bore the mantle of mainstream legitimacy. As an Emmy-winning investigative reporter, held in high esteem within journalistic circles, he simultaneously cultivated trust among insiders, witnesses, and fellow researchers who recognized that he would engage with their narratives in a respectful and serious manner. Over the years, Knapp evolved into a conduit between the realms of journalism and the mysteries enveloping UFOs. He hosted segments on Coast to Coast AM, collaborated on publications with scientist Colm Keller, and advanced the UFO discourse at a time when mainstream media largely brushed it aside. By the late 2010s, the topic of UFOs began its gradual resurgence into public conversation. Revelations about Pentagon programs like the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, known as AATIP, corroborated the long-held belief that the U.S. government had covertly investigated these phenomena. Military pilots bravely stepped forward to share their harrowing encounters with unidentified crafts, recounting movements uncannily reminiscent of those Lazar had once described. In this revived context, Lazar's narrative gained new traction. A fresh wave of interest arose among a generation familiar with cultural allusions to Area 51, leading them to rediscover the enigmatic figure behind the lore. In 2018, filmmaker Jeremy Corbell unveiled the documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Flying Saucers, produced in conjunction with George Knapp. This cinematic effort thrust Lazar back into the spotlight, once again placing him before the cameras, recounting the same saga he had articulated decades earlier. What resonated profoundly with many viewers was his remarkable consistency. 3 decades had elapsed, yet his narrative remained unaltered. He recounted details of S4, the flying discs, the reactor, Element 115, the test flights, and the relentless surveillance he underwent. His tone remained calm, his demeanor subtly reluctant. He did not strive to convince his audience, but merely reiterated what he had always maintained. The documentary captivated millions, sparking renewed debates about his claims. Shortly after, Lazar took to the airwaves on the Joe Rogan Experience, one of the most widely listened to podcasts globally. For hours, he elaborated on his experiences, reaching an audience exponentially larger than the one that had first encountered him in 1989. The impact was profound. A new generation, unencumbered by old prejudices, absorbed his words with fresh perspectives. In this revival, Knapp served as a steadfast anchor, providing context, historical background, and essential connections. He reminded viewers that, despite the controversies, Lazar's assertions had profoundly influenced the discourse surrounding Area 51, linking his depictions with contemporary military assessments of unidentified aerial phenomena. Knapp also played an integral role in the broader disclosure movement, reporting on the Tic Tac incidents involving Navy pilots, the unveiling of military footage, and the evolving stance of government entities. He engaged with senators, scientists, and defense officials, framing the subject not as an eccentricity, but as a matter of policy. His journalism helped facilitate the current epoch where unidentified flying objects, rebranded as unidentified aerial phenomena, are openly discussed in congressional hearings and Pentagon briefings. Through this transformative period, Lazar remained primarily silent, occasionally expressing his regret for stepping forward. He noted that it had only brought him turmoil. He refrained from attending conferences, building a personal brand, or chasing fame. He appeared to favor anonymity, yet the narrative clung to him tenaciously. Even in his withdrawal, his voice resonated. Researchers persistently debated his assertions, with supporters emphasizing contemporary parallels, crafts maneuvering silently with abrupt movements that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Skeptics, however, remained fixated on absent records and contradictions within his accounts. Nevertheless, whether embraced or dismissed, Lazar's name was inextricably intertwined with the lore of Area 51. His identity, once obscured under the alias of Dennis, evolved into a symbol of secrecy itself. As we moved further into the 2020s, government disclosures regarding unidentified aerial phenomena lent renewed significance to the Lazar narrative. When Navy pilots narrated encounters with crafts that accelerated instantaneously, hovered without a sound, and traveled in ways that challenged known physics, it brought many minds back to Lazar's vivid descriptions of gravity amplifiers. As Pentagon assessments acknowledged objects not attributable to any recognized nation, proponents repeatedly referred back to his insights about S4. The context had undergone a radical transformation. What once faced derision in 1989 had morphed into reports that resonated with aspects of his testimony, even in the absence of explicit acknowledgement of his name. The divide remained palpable. Believers and skeptics continued to engage in fierce discourse, yet the subject of UFOs had gained a newfound respectability. By this juncture, George Knapp had transcended his role as merely a journalist, having morphed into a historian of the UFO phenomenon. He meticulously preserved a vast archive of documents, interviews, and broadcasts that spanned multiple decades. In his reporting, he voiced the concerns of whistleblowers, researchers, and officials who entrusted him with their stories. Knapp carried the discourse through periods of ridicule into an era where it garnered acknowledgement and validation. His partnership with Lazar stood as one of the hallmark achievements of his career, though his influence extended well beyond that singular event. His endeavors encompassed detailed investigations into Skinwalker Ranch, military programs, and the contemporary debates surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena. He emerged as one of the few individuals who traversed the entire trajectory of this narrative, from hushed whispers in the Mojave Desert to discussions in congressional chambers. Together, Lazar and Knapp illustrate the dual facets of the modern UFO saga. Lazar symbolizes the reticent whistleblower whose testimony steadfastly persists, steady and unyielding. Knapp embodies the relentless journalist committed to unraveling the mystery, guiding the discourse from the margins of society into mainstream consideration. Their paths are inextricably linked. Without Lazar's audacity, Knapp may never have ventured into the enigmatic world of UFOs. Conversely, without Knapp's relentless pursuit, Lazar's narrative might have faded into mere hearsay. Together, they have indelibly shaped the annals of history. As the modern era unfolds with Pentagon programs, global sightings, and evolving public perceptions, their narrative stands as a critical reference point. It is summoned in documentaries, featured in debates, and recollected in every discourse surrounding Area 51. Bob Lazar and George Knapp, who began as whistleblower and journalist, now find themselves woven into the very fabric of history. The perpetual enigma. More than 30 years have elapsed since Bob Lazar first stepped into the dim glow of a Las Vegas television studio and disclosed the existence of S4 to the world. The broadcast was delivered with caution, his identity shrouded in secrecy. Yet, even beneath this cloak, his words resonated with a weight that could not be overlooked. When he ultimately revealed his name days later, he ignited a debate that would endure through modern history. As it stands today, the question remains unresolved. Lazar's claims have never been definitively substantiated. No tangible evidence of the craft that he described has been unveiled. Official documentation to validate his employment at S4 is yet to emerge. However, his narrative has never dissipated. It continues to resonate as a conundrum suspended between conviction and skepticism. For Bob Lazar, the years following 1989 were tumultuous. He faced derision, doubt, and the erasure of records that obscured his background. In response, he receded from public view, opting for a quieter existence managing United Nuclear Scientific Supplies. He provided interviews only sporadically, often conveying regret over his momentous disclosure. Yet, despite the personal consequences, Lazar steadfastly maintained his account. Over the course of more than 3 decades, through countless interviews, documentaries, and discussions, his testament has remained unwavering. He has neither expanded his narrative to cater to new interpretations nor recanted it under duress. He recounts the same details of disks nestled within hangars sculpted from desert hills, of a reactor fueled by element 115, and of silent test flights witnessed in the Nevada darkness. This unwavering consistency is part of what lends his story such enduring power. Supporters regard it as a testament to its authenticity. A deceiver, they argue, would have altered or embellished his tale under decades of scrutiny. Skeptics offer an alternative perspective, suggesting that Lazar clings to his story because he understands its unverifiability. However one may choose to view it, the undeniable reality remains that Lazar has steadfastly retained his position. His consistent testimony occupies a central role in the contemporary narrative surrounding UFOs. If Lazar's task was to vocalize, George Knapp's role was to lend an attentive ear and to disseminate. Without Knapp, Lazar's revelations might have remained confined to insular circles of researchers and enthusiasts. It was Knapp who discerned the profound implications of Lazar's assertions, who courageously risked his career to broadcast them, and who propelled the conversation forward with gravity. Knapp's choice in 1989 might have jeopardized his professional trajectory. Instead, it recalibrated it. He emerged not merely as a reporter, but as a historian of the UFO enigma. From Skinwalker Ranch to the United States, Pentagon's AA-TIP program, Knapp traced the threads of secrecy that stretched far beyond S4. His credibility conferred importance to the subject, ensuring it could no longer be easily dismissed. In today's landscape, where Navy pilots recount encounters that echo Lazar's claims in congressional hearings openly acknowledge UAPs, Knapp's persistence appears less a gamble and more a prescient endeavor. He sustained the narrative through eras when others mocked it, keeping it vibrant until society was prepared to engage. In tandem, Lazar and Knapp reinvented the UFO discourse. Prior to their involvement, the mystery often revolved around ephemeral lights in the sky, sightings that proved difficult to substantiate. Following their alliance, the conversation transitioned to inquiries about engineering, secrecy, and technology. Lazar introduced terminology surrounding reactors, amplifiers, and exotic materials. Knapp offered it a platform, framing it not as idle gossip but as historical documentation. The repercussions encompassed both cultural and historical dimensions. Area 51, once a mere obscurity, evolved into a commonly recognized entity. Movies, television programs, and novels drew upon the vivid imagery Lazar portrayed: hidden facilities, clandestine hangars, discs poised in the desert. Conferences and documentaries continually revisited his testimony. His narrative became interwoven into the cultural tapestry of UFO lore. Even skepticism failed to diminish its impact. Derision and humor only served to solidify the connection between Area 51 and extraterrestrial vehicles. By lampooning it, they inadvertently perpetuated it. By casting doubt, they ensured its survival. The very act of debate itself became the evidence of its importance. In recent years, as the United States government has acknowledged UAPs and released findings regarding unidentified aerial phenomena, Lazar's narrative has once again emerged with vigor. As Navy pilots recounted encounters with crafts that defied the laws of physics, many recalled Lazar's depictions of gravity amplifiers. When element 115 secured a place on the periodic table, even in its unstable form, his advocates perceived validation. Lazar's name persists in discussions surrounding disclosure. His testimony remains a pivotal reference point, cited by believers as proof of concealed truths and referenced by skeptics as a cautionary tale of unverified narratives. The division remains as pronounced as ever. Meanwhile, Knapp has risen to become one of the most respected figures within the field. He is no longer merely a reporter risking his livelihood on a contentious tale, but rather a seasoned investigator whose unwavering commitment brought credibility to the phenomenon. His role in transitioning the subject from the margins to the forefront of public consciousness is irrefutable. The persistent enigma of Lazar and Knapp's narrative lies in its refusal to reach a resolution. If Lazar spoke the truth, humanity may have already encountered technology beyond our world. Conversely, if his claims were fabrications, then he has crafted one of the most powerful myths of contemporary history, shaping perceptions of secrecy and UFOs. Yet perhaps the most critical aspect is not the quest for proof, but the very notion of secrecy itself. Lazar's account illuminated the mechanisms behind suppression: the vanishing of records, the intimidation of witnesses, the denials from those in power. Whether these actions signify a cover-up or represent the typical response to a polarizing figure, they echo patterns observed throughout UFO history. In this regard, Lazar and Knapp unveiled not merely a potential reality regarding UFOs, but also a deeper truth about the nature of secrecy. They demonstrated the extent to which information can be manipulated, the ways in which narratives can be crafted, and the means by which whistleblowers can face suppression. Years later, the impact of Bob Lazar and George Knapp firmly stands in history's annals. Lazar, embodying the archetype of the reluctant whistleblower, maintains that he derived no personal gain from his revelations, yet his actions undeniably influenced the course of history. On the other hand, Knapp exemplifies the diligent chronicler, the journalist who embraced the risks necessitated by such a controversial subject, propelling the narrative forward into the collective consciousness. Together, they represent the dual functions that have come to define the saga of UFOs, the seer and the storyteller, one who bore witness and the other who recounted that experience. In absence of either individual, the tale might have faded into obscurity, yet together they forged a narrative destined to endure well beyond their separate existences. The vast arid landscape where this narrative commenced continues to reside in silence. Groom Lake persists in its covert operations, the military installation shrouded from scrutiny. If there are aircraft hangars hewn into the mountains, they remain firmly sealed, Should there be extraordinary crafts under examination within that secretive enclave, they remain hidden from view. The enigma lingers, suspended in a delicate balance between disbelief and conviction. Amidst this obscurity, the contributions of Lazar and Knapp ensure the world perceives that desert through a markedly altered lens. The concept of remarkable vehicles, possibly concealed among its hills, has undeniably woven itself into the fabric of our historical narrative. That which was once regarded as mere folly has now found a cornerstone in our imaginations. Few figures resonate as profoundly within the UFO discourse as Bob Lazar and George Knapp, the whistleblower and the journalist who amplified his voice. As a duo, they sparked a discussion that continues to smolder. Their legacy is one that is poised to endure the passage of time. Whether their narrative is deemed true or fabricated, an illumination or a subterfuge, it remains one of the most persistent enigmas of our era. And as long as the desert maintains its quietude, the inquiry will persist. What lurks, concealed beyond the ridges of Area 51? Thank you for journeying with us this evening. We have delved into the intertwined lives of Bob Lazar and George Knapp, the witness to extraordinary advancements and the individual who articulated those experiences. Even after many years, the questions are far from settled, the desert continuing in its muted silence. Whether viewed as an unveiling of truth or merely whispers of speculation, their saga has indelibly influenced our perceptions of UFOs and the machinations of secrecy.